Hey, George Lenny here. About a week ago I came out with a video on Revie. Did pretty well, but there's one big issue. I'm not well known, right? I'm not a super popular dude. My voice isn't exactly the largest out there, so you got people not being super trustworthy of what I say. I, however, have found a solution. Various people in the EXE team will just speak for me. No longer will these points have to come out from me, a nobody, when instead they will come out of people that you know that are way more popular than me. As such, whenever that all too commonly regurgitated platitude comes out of, well, didn't Revie admit to it, you can respond with, well, people in the EXE team admitted it was all fake.
So as I introduce this segment, I'm just going to have this video play that shows that these DMs are real and that they're not fake. But anyway, the greatest and most unexpected explainer of everything I've said in my previous video on Revie, the man who's most definitely going to take my position as Revie defender, is that of ComGaming. Having initially gone into quite a long direct message conversation with that of a good chum of mine on Independence Day, who will remain unknown so as for the sake of not being sent death threats, ComGaming revealed quite a few very interesting details about this entire Revie and EXE situation, each equally juicy to one another in my opinion. Besides some of the stuff I mentioned in the last video, like the fake IP build being made by someone that's part of the EXE team, he also talks about how the evidence against Revie isn't really evidence, and as well as that, the evidence that the EXE team has doesn't work in the long term. But it's not just that. Apparently, I also predicted the argument he used before I even knew he said it in my last video, that the ERP between KubiQuark and Revie was consensual, and that it was, as ComGaming says, between a sophomore and a senior. Heck, even ComGaming agrees with my argument that my pal makes here. Speaking of KubiQuark, ComGaming also says that KubiQuark told Revie to kill themselves multiple times, which I gotta say, that's a very nice and pleasant thing to say to a person. On Rightburst, ComGaming has plenty to say about him. Not only was I proven correct that yeah, Rightburst does hold a major vendetta against Revie, a Revie took my director position from me type of vendetta as ComGaming says, but also Rightburst hated Revie to such a point that he set up the Revie outing, made the group chat, showed everyone information that Revie was a quote-unquote pedophile, and then told False Cow to post it because Rightburst didn't feel like he could. This pure hatred for Revie doesn't just end at that, however. He hates Revie so much that he takes his time meticulously designing Wikidna, making sure that it's as close to Faker as possible. And I was told that these kinds of characters had nothing to do with Faker. What the heck? In spite of all of this, however, to everybody who still thinks that maybe what ComGaming has said here is just him making up all of this, don't worry. He himself says that he personally has no reason to lie about this stuff. Now that was the original conversation my pal and ComGaming had with one another, but it doesn't just end there. Soon after my pal starts to share these truths around, they end up receiving quite a few angry remarks from ComGaming. Stuff about how my pal betrayed him and backstabbed him and pretended to be his friend. Now besides the mean comments, what I noticed that's quite interesting is that in his rant, he mainly complains about the fact that all what he said was spread out there and not about the information itself, saying stuff like, you used me for info, which implies that what ComGaming said was actually correct information. One final point for the sake of answering all accusations. This accusation that ComGaming throws at Revie in the middle of the conversation him and my pal have here, that Revie said to him that if he didn't have a GF then he would go after him. My pal asked ComGaming for proof and he refused to provide evidence, as well as I asked Revie about this and I was told that he legit never remembers saying this to Com, that Revie has no memory of such an incident and that Com might be taking something old out of context. This is again another Mikey situation where I can't disprove something that's never been proven, so I don't know what else to do here. So since my last video came out, there have been some people that have watched that video and have then decided to remain neutral on the whole subject, saying that they're waiting until the various EXE developers I've talked about in my previous video respond to the evidence I have shown. Though I do respect these people giving these EXE devs I talked about the benefit of the doubt, it's been almost 2 weeks now, and none of them have responded to my arguments with the exception of one actually, MarStarBro, which I do respect him for doing so. Commenting on my video at Tuesday, July the 19th at 5:05 AM EST, MarStar attempts to make an argument against my video. Though you can pause and read what he said as well as pause and then read my response and some of the other responses that various people made to his comment, there are a few things within his comment that I find to be very notable. Now first within it, he says that my theory about how various EXE developers cancel Revie for power isn't true at all, but he then literally says the sentence afterwards that yeah, ComGaming and Avery did take over to add their own OCs into the mod. I don't know how he attempts to reconcile the 2 points together in his head, that they didn't take over to get power, yet at the same time they exactly did that, but it should also be noted that he also admits that yeah, he did put in his own original character in the mod, as well as also admitting to putting literally himself in along with that character. Of course, he attempts to justify that by saying that someone else would have voiced him. By the end of the day, it is his own character that's supposed to represent himself that was going to be in the mod, so I don't see how a voice makes that much of a difference. The second thing as well with his comment is that he admits that, quote, the whole doc with the accusations against Revie was put together a little poorly, unquote. Now, besides the fact that that's the greatest understatement of the year, and as well as that he's partially trying to be a little core here, he is basically saying that, yeah, the original accusations are at the very least not as great as people claim for them to be. Now, he too, similar to the last part I mentioned, tries to justify this by this ever-repeated vague assertion that Revie is a terrible person in general and that there's proof for this. The funny part about this, however, is someone responded to him asking for this proof, and he then said, well, I'm not the one with the proof. Of course, ignoring the fact that his bluff got called out, the great question that I must now ask is, well, if Revie is just a terrible person in general, why did you accuse Revie of being a pedophile and groomer and manipulator with the false evidence when you could have used the real proof that you and your friends had? Now, I don't know about you, but all things considered, it seems to me that Mar and these others that threw these original accusations around are trying to weasel their way out of the fact that they've been caught lying and are now attempting to say that, well, Revie is still a terrible person. But Revie wasn't ever originally accused of just being generally indecent or like being some jackoff. He was accused of being a pedophile and groomer and manipulator. Do you see the major difference between these two types of accusations? One that if they find you guilty of at most, you'll have to do some community service, and the other that you'll spend decades in prison and then have to register as a sex offender. So anyway, after he posts this comment on my video, I then respond to him, and so too do others as I mentioned beforehand, except instead of responding to any of our arguments, he instead just deletes his own comment, so that's cool. Now, eventually afterwards, in order to get both sides of the story on what MarStar said, a buddy of mine ends up contacting Avery privately and ComGaming publicly because ComGaming doesn't allow the option to be directly messaged. Though he has yet to receive a response from Avery, when sending his tweet out to ComGaming, he ends up receiving a response from MarStar, actually. Similar to the last comment he made on my video, there's also a few things about this response that he gives to my buddy that I find notable. First is that instead of splitting the blame between Avery and ComGaming, he instead puts it all on Avery and then tries to defend ComGaming by saying that it was only 1 or 2 EXEs he put in. Now, 2 things about that. First, he doesn't dispute the fact in the previous comment he said that it was supposed to be a team effort, but then Avery, and more importantly, relating to this comment, ComGaming kept putting in stuff that they themselves wanted. So yeah, even if ComGaming only did put in 1 or 2 EXEs, we can still use Mars' previous comment to say that he put those EXEs in without thinking of the rest of the team. Second, he tries to defend ComGaming by saying that he only put in 1 or 2 EXEs, but give me a break. Revie was called a manipulator for putting Faker into the mod, and that character was agreed by Right Burst and the rest of the team to be put into it. Now, I gotta mention that looking at these 2 posts MarStarBro has made, Avery's comment that Revie engaged in a mass level of manipulation towards the team in favor of what Revie wanted over the health/benefits of what the EXE mod were at seems a lot more like self-projection now, especially when MarStar now solely blames Avery for acting like a dictator who put in anything that suited their whims. As a final note, I think one of the funniest parts about him talking about the comment he made on my video is that he considered himself to be lashing out when he actually tried to respond to my arguments rather than just ignoring it like everybody else on the EXE team. And I think he would also consider himself to have lashed out again, considering that he then deleted his comment on my friend's post and then blocked him, along with having my buddy be blocked by ComGaming. Now, I've already addressed some of the stuff here in my other video, so I'll try and keep it short. Some person who will also remain private so that they too don't also get sent death threats talked with Avery on July the 5th. Within that conversation, Avery says that the pedophilia Revie was accused of was blown heavily out of proportion at first until the dust settled, more so inappropriate behavior towards minors, and that it was about how Revie was unable to control themselves to that extent, etc, etc. Now, you may read this and then say, well, Avery still says that Revie had inappropriate behavior towards minors, but 1, I already talked about how that was all a bunch of lies in my previous video, and 2, just the fact that Avery has to heavily scale down the accusations is a pretty important concession. Of course, none of these people are ever going to just out of nowhere say that Revie is innocent and we lied and we apologize, etc, etc. So having them say the Revies that it was blown heavily out of proportion is a pretty bombshell point. Other things include some self-projection that I already talked about in MarStar's section, and then a bit about how Jester Frog, the person who refused to delete child pornography, apparently had good intentions while Revie had bad intentions. Anyway, as I said before, I've already covered a lot of this stuff in my last video, but still, it's nice to get a refresher. So Faker is such a popular character that there too are now fakers that pretend to be Revie. The most notable are Tverker EXE and the person that now runs the @Revie_03 account. Now, besides the fact that Revie doesn't have a Twitter anymore and that they personally have confirmed that both of these accounts aren't actually them, there's also the fact that these accounts both behave in quite odd ways. The person that's taken over @Revie_03 has tweeted egg fridge a bunch of times, and Tverker EXE refers to Revie as another person, which would be weird if they were talking about themselves, but would make perfect sense if they were pretending to be Revie, which is what they're trying to do. Now, all things considered, it seems to me that these multiple attempts by various people to pretend to be Revie and then say awful stuff seem to be just another way to give those that still hate Revie another reason to do so. And you see that through these kinds of tweets in which they say stuff like, why do people still like Revie, and Revie is still evil, or other things like that. Now, this comment that I'm showing did get a quote tweet by the original creator in which they say that it's a fake account, but they sidestep having to delete the tweet or having to apologize for accusing Revie of saying this awful stuff by saying that they're still leaving it up to show you how unfunny this faker is. That's a very nice excuse, but at the end of the day, the original tweet is still up. People are still looking at it, and based on the fact that there was like a 700 like discrepancy at the time of writing this, most people that saw the first tweet haven't seen the second.
Also, as a final note for this section, even when these people that hate Revie have to admit that these fake accounts aren't Revie, they still try to say that, well, this person is still a fan of Revie. But how could you consider someone that pretends to be Revie so as to have awful stuff they say blamed on Revie a fan of them? To me, if anything, these fake accounts are most likely very passionate haters of Revie, willing to do anything to continue to have this person's life ruined. Now, some people have said in regards to this drama, who cares, all this stuff is old news, everybody's moved on already. But the only reason they get to say this stuff is because they actually have the ability to move on. Unlike them, Revie can't just continue to move on in life. You look at the comments people still make when talking about Revie, it's still all this stuff about him being a groomer and manipulator and pedophile. I think as well a particularly ironic part about all this Revie talk is that a lot of these people that do agree with me, they also think that Revie is innocent, don't want to talk about it because they're scared of also getting the mob on them. Yet the only reason it's going to continue to be like this is because nobody wants to speak up. Nobody wants to say that Revie's innocent, and as such, people are still going to think that Revie's some evil person, and because of that, nobody's going to want to say that Revie's innocent. It goes on and on and on. The only way this will stop is if someone finally decides to break the cycle and actually talk about this stuff. As always, all the evidence I've used is going to be downloadable in the description. Just want to thank you for watching this video.